80. 80 years. That is how long the global mathematical community worked on a single geometry problem, a problem so cleanly stated you could write it on a napkin without cracking it. The problem was posed in 1946 by Paul Erdos, one of the most celebrated mathematicians of the 20th century. It asks a deceptively simple question about points scattered on a flat plane. For 8 decades, the sharpest minds in the field chipped away at it. They made incremental progress, they published partial results, they refined their estimates, but the core of it held. The underlying assumption that everyone had quietly settled on, that a regular grid-like arrangement of points was the optimal strategy, went unchallenged for a lifetime. In May 2026, an AI model dissolved that assumption in a single autonomous burst of mathematical reasoning. No team, no years of iteration, no human insight guiding the path. The model produced a 125-page proof that didn't just improve on the human consensus, it structurally overturned it. It showed that the grid was never the right answer, not even close. And when some of the greatest mathematicians alive read the proof, they said it was real, original, publishable in the most prestigious journal in the field, without revision. That is where this episode begins, and I promise you, the deeper story is even more extraordinary than that headline. Welcome to Mindcast. I'm Will. This show is built on one core conviction, that the ideas reshaping the world deserve more than a headline. They deserve careful, honest, enthusiastic unpacking, and today's topic earns every minute of that. We are talking about specialized superintelligence, what researchers are calling SGI. Not the generalized artificial intelligence that dominates tech coverage, not the all-knowing, do-everything system that has been promised for decades. Something different, something quieter, and if the evidence is any guide, something far more immediately consequential. Before we go further, a word of transparency. The analytical framework underpinning this episode comes from an internal research synthesis, a document that is not publicly available. But every major claim in it is grounded in publicly accessible sources, journal papers, preprints, conference recordings, and statements from researchers. I've collected those links carefully, and they are all in the show notes. If something I say today sends you down a rabbit hole, use them. Here is the promise of this episode. By the time we are done, you will understand why SGI, not AGI, is the real story of our technological moment. You will have a genuine grasp of what the Erdos breakthrough actually reveals about the nature of machine intelligence. You will hear the world's greatest living mathematician tell you precisely what AI can and cannot do, and you will walk away with a concrete, honest framework for thinking about what any of this means for your own intellectual life and career. Let's go. Key Insight 1. What the AI actually did and why it shocks even the experts. Let me set up the Erdos problem properly. You have n points. You can place them anywhere you want on a two-dimensional flat surface, a plane. Your objective is to maximize the number of pairs of those points that sit exactly 1 unit of distance apart. 1 unit, precise, not approximately, exactly. At first glance, it sounds like a game, but the mathematics underneath is ferocious. It connects combinatorics, geometry, and number theory in ways that took generations of mathematicians to even begin to map. And the central question, what is the theoretical ceiling for how many unit distance pairs you can create, is where the Erdos problem lives. For 80 years, the working answer was, arrange your points in a square lattice, graph paper style. Carefully space the spacing, and you produce an enormous number of unit distance pairs. This felt right intuitively. It looked right computationally at every scale humans could test. And so the mathematical community converged on a conjecture. The growth rate of unit distance pairs is essentially linear in the number of points, with only a tiny logarithmic bonus that vanishes as the numbers get larger. The grid wins. The grid always wins. The OpenAI reasoning model, working autonomously, proved that it does not.
What the model found was a polynomial improvement, a fundamentally stronger class of result. The bonus over the grid is not vanishing, it is real and fixed, and the way the model found it is what makes this so intellectually stunning.
Rather than working within the tools of discrete geometry that human mathematicians had been using for decades, the model crossed into algebraic number theory, a completely different branch of mathematics. Specifically, it employed something called Golod-Shafarevich theory and infinite class field towers. Here is the accessible version of what that means. Imagine number systems that are far more exotic than the integers or the real numbers you learned about in school. These are algebraic structures with intricate internal architecture, hidden symmetries that only become visible when you look at them through the right mathematical lens. The AI found those symmetries, and it found a way to transplant them into the geometry of the flat plane. By doing that, it generated arrangements of points that produce unit-distance pairs at a rate no grid could match. Princeton mathematician Will Sohn then took the AI's framework and refined it further, establishing a sharper explicit lower bound that confirmed and extended the result. Now here is the detail that I find most philosophically arresting. This arrangement only beats the grid once the number of points exceeds 10 to the power of 2 million. Write that out and you get a 1 followed by 2 million zeros. The entire observable universe contains roughly 10 to the 80 atoms. The scale at which the AI's answer starts winning is so cosmically beyond anything physically meaningful that no human geometer could ever have encountered it through intuition, visualization, or simulation. The grid looked optimal at every scale we can perceive. It was wrong at a scale we can never perceive, and the AI saw it anyway. Thomas Bloom, who maintains the official register of Erdos problems, put it beautifully. The AI succeeded by, quoting him directly, persevering down paths that a human may have dismissed as not worth their time to explore. And Fields medalist Timothy Gowers, one of the most respected mathematicians alive, read the proof and said he would have sent it straight to the annals of mathematics, no hesitation. Canadian mathematician Daniel Litt called it the first AI result he finds interesting in itself. These are not polite compliments. These are landmark statements from people who have spent their careers being unimpressed.
Now, where did this capability come from? Because the May 2026 breakthrough did not materialize from nowhere. It was built on a foundation that Google DeepMind had been constructing since 2024, and understanding that foundation matters. At the 2024 International Mathematical Olympiad, the IMO, DeepMind deployed two complementary systems called Alpha Proof and Alpha Geometry 2. The IMO is not a computation contest. These problems require genuine creative mathematical reasoning, multi-step proofs that human competitors spend days preparing for. The two systems together solved 4 of the 6 problems and scored 28 out of 42 points. Silver medal territory, 1 point off gold. Alpha Geometry 2 specifically posted an 84% solve rate on every IMO geometry problem from the year 2000 through to 2024. The average human gold medalist performs below that threshold in geometry. Let that sit for a moment. But the innovation that makes Alpha Proof so significant is not just its performance, it is its verification architecture. Most AI language models write mathematics in natural language, and the dirty secret of natural language mathematical AI is that it can produce prose that looks rigorous but conceals logical leaps that would make any trained mathematician wince. Alpha Proof bypassed this entirely. It proves theorems in Lean, a formal proof assistant that mechanically checks every single inference, not approximately, not mostly, every line. If there is a gap, Lean finds it. The proof either holds completely or it does not hold at all. That is the technical infrastructure that gave the Erdos proof its credibility. It is not just impressive, it is verifiable in a way that no human-readable proof of comparable complexity could easily be.
Key Insight 2.
the smartest mathematician in the world has some important warnings. It would be easy, after everything I just described, to conclude that human mathematicians are essentially redundant, that AI has taken the wheel and we are passengers now. That would be a mistake, and the person who makes that case most compellingly is someone you would not expect to be a defender of human cognitive value, Terence Tao. If you are not familiar with the name, here is the short version. Tao is a Fields Medalist, the mathematical equivalent of a Nobel Prize. He is widely regarded as the most productive and versatile mathematician of his generation. He has contributed to number theory, harmonic analysis, partial differential equations, combinatorics, and more, often simultaneously. He is not a person who lacks confidence in human mathematical ability. And his journey with AI reasoning systems over the past 2 years is one of the most instructive case studies in the whole AI landscape. In September 2024, Tao evaluated these tools and was openly underwhelmed. He described working with them as being like supervising, and I am quoting his exact words here, a mediocre but not completely incompetent graduate student. Occasionally useful, frequently in need of correction, prone to confidently stating things that were subtly wrong. By March 2026, 18 months later, he had fundamentally changed his position. At a major conference on accelerating mathematics with AI, he declared these systems ready for prime time. The reason, in his words, they now save more time than they waste. So what exactly changed, and what does his actual workflow look like today?
Tao has integrated AI tools into his research across 3 concrete categories. First, literature mapping. When you work across multiple mathematical fields simultaneously, as Tao does, staying current with relevant papers is itself a research task. It used to consume weeks of database searches, cross-referencing, and manual bibliographic work. Now he can scaffold that in minutes with a well-structured prompt. Second, code and visualization. A significant portion of mathematical research involves numerical experiments, generating plots, running simulations, testing whether a conjecture holds for small cases before investing in a full proof. AI writes that code now, freeing his cognitive bandwidth for the work that actually requires a human mind. Third, conjecture testing. Before devoting serious time to a speculative mathematical direction, Tao uses AI to run rapid preliminary checks. Is this approach even plausible? Does it fall apart immediately when you test it? The cumulative effect, he says, is that it allows him to try crazier things. The cost of exploring a risky or unconventional idea has dropped so far that it is now rational to take swings he would have previously set aside as too speculative to be worth the time investment. That is a genuine change in the texture of how elite mathematics gets done. But, and this is a critical but, Tao is very precise about where the boundary lies. He uses 2 analogies that I think are among the most intellectually clarifying things said about AI in this entire era of the technology. The first is Kepler versus Newton. Johannes Kepler spent years, literally years, systematically testing mathematical relationships against the astronomical data of Tycho Brahe until he extracted his 3 laws of planetary motion. He found the pattern, he described it precisely, but he had absolutely no explanation for why it was true.
It took Isaac Newton, decades later, to construct the theory of universal gravitation, a unifying conceptual framework that didn't just explain Kepler's laws, but encompassed every form of mechanical motion in existence. Tao's argument is direct. Current AI is an extraordinary Kepler. It detects regularities, surfaces unexpected connections, and identifies patterns at a scale and speed no human could match. But it is not Newton. It cannot yet construct the unifying theoretical architecture that explains the deeper reason those patterns exist. His second analogy is the one that stays with me. He describes modern AI as a jumping robot operating in a completely dark mountain range. This robot can leap powerfully, without sight, without a map, and land on isolated, narrow ledges that no human climber could ever physically reach.
It arrives at truths in places humans cannot go. The Erdos solution is a perfect example, a truth that exists at 10 to the power of 2 million, alleged so astronomically high that no human intuition or simulation could have found it. But the robot cannot build the path. It cannot lay down the cumulative, coherent staircase from the base of the mountain to those ledges. It cannot connect the isolated truths to each other or to the broader edifice of mathematical understanding. It finds, it cannot explain. It discovers facts without building the theory that makes those facts comprehensible. And this distinction between finding and understanding, between Kepler's regularity and Newton's gravity, has a practical consequence that changes everything about how we should think about the future of scientific research. Think about what it means when the cost of generating new ideas drops to effectively zero. For most of human history, the hard constraint on scientific progress was idea generation. Coming up with a genuinely original hypothesis was difficult, slow, and rare. That constraint is dissolving. AI systems can now generate candidate proofs, speculative theories, and novel conjectures faster than any human review process can absorb them, which means the bottleneck has shifted. The new constraint is not generating ideas, it is verifying them. Can we trust this proof? Is this conjecture actually correct? Is this biological hypothesis reproducible?
Human peer review, already strained before any of this began, is now being swamped by volume it was never designed to handle. This is why formal proof assistants like Lean, tools that verify mathematical proofs step by logical step with machine precision, are not a technical curiosity. They are becoming load-bearing infrastructure for how mathematics will actually function in the coming decade. The researchers who understand this shift and who are building fluency in verification as a discipline are positioning themselves at exactly the right frontier.
Key Insight 3: The Silent Revolution, and why SGI is the story AGI is drowning out. Let me reframe the AI landscape for you, because I think the dominant narrative gets something importantly wrong. When most people think about AI progress, they think about the race to build one enormous, all-capable system, artificial general intelligence, a single model, trained on everything, capable of anything. And there is genuine work happening on that front, but that monolithic approach is hitting hard limits. The energy demands are extraordinary. The water consumption required to cool these data centers is significant enough that it is starting to create genuine infrastructure stress. The returns on simply scaling up general training data are diminishing. And, crucially, these giant systems still hallucinate in specialist domains. They produce smooth, confident prose that contains subtle errors that would be immediately obvious to any domain expert. There is a parallel trajectory that receives far less attention and is arguably far more powerful. Instead of building one massive generalized system, you build small, efficient, intensely focused models trained on deep, structured, domain-specific knowledge. You couple them with formal reasoning tools, logic systems, ontologies, knowledge graphs, and you achieve superhuman performance not across everything, but within a precisely bounded domain. This is Specialized Superintelligence, SGI, and it is already here. The example that makes this concrete is QWQ-Med3. A research team took an open-source base model at 32 billion parameters, small by the standards of frontier AI, and trained it not on the general internet, but on 18 authoritative medical textbooks, combined with a structured knowledge graph containing 24,000 clinical reasoning tasks. Multi-hop diagnostic chains, the kind of reasoning that requires following several inferential steps through ambiguous, overlapping clinical evidence. The result significantly outperforms practicing human clinicians on the hardest diagnostic questions. not on easy cases, on the complex, multi-step scenarios that trip up residents and specialists alike. Superhuman diagnostic depth from a lean, precisely trained model that costs a fraction of what a monolithic AGI system requires. This is the shift from AI as tool to AI as discoverer, and it is happening right now, domain by domain, mostly below the radar of mainstream coverage.
Nowhere is this silent revolution more visible than in the biological sciences. Let me walk you through 3 systems that together represent one of the most extraordinary periods of scientific acceleration in the history of the field. AlphaFold 3, announced by Google DeepMind in May 2024. Its predecessor had already accomplished something remarkable, cracking the 50-year protein folding problem, predicting how a chain of amino acids collapses into a 3-dimensional shape. AlphaFold 3 extended that into entirely new territory. It models how entire molecular complexes interact, proteins docking with DNA, with RNA, with small chemical ligands, with metal ions, the full biochemical conversation between molecules, not just the structure of individual participants. The practical consequence is almost hard to describe in scale. The AlphaFold database now holds over 200 million predicted protein structures, essentially every cataloged protein known to science. 3 million researchers across 190 countries use it actively. Experiments that previously required years of painstaking crystallography and laboratory work can now be initialized over a single weekend. That is not incremental speed improvement. That is a structural transformation in how biological science happens. Then came Alpha Proteo in September 2024, and this is where something fundamentally new enters the picture. AlphaFold predicts, Alpha Proteo creates. It generates entirely novel protein binders from scratch, proteins that have never existed in nature, engineered from the ground up to attach to specific molecular targets with extraordinary affinity. Across 7 critical target proteins, including VEGF-A, a growth factor directly implicated in tumor development, Alpha Proteo achieved binding strengths up to 300 times greater than conventional bioengineering methods.
This is not a refinement of existing technique. This is a new category of biological capability. And then, published in Nature in January 2026, AlphaGenome tackled what geneticists call the dark matter of the human genome. Here's the context you need. Only 2% of human DNA codes for proteins, the molecules that carry out most cellular functions. The other 98% consists of non-coding sequences that act as a vast, intricate regulatory system. They control when genes switch on, in which cell types, in response to which signals, with what intensity. And they harbor more than 85% of all known disease-associated genetic variants. AlphaGenome can now process genomic sequences up to 1 million base pairs long and output nearly 6,000 simultaneous prediction tracks, covering gene expression, chromatin architecture, and chromosomal 3-dimensional structure at single base resolution. It can model the consequence of changing a single letter in your DNA. It can simulate the downstream effects of a CRISPR edit before any cell is touched. The implications for precision oncology and genetic medicine are only beginning to be understood.
Let me bring everything together. We have covered an enormous amount of ground today, and I want to leave you with 3 takeaways that are concrete, honest, and genuinely actionable, not vague reassurances, but real intellectual frameworks you can carry forward. The first is what I'm calling the practitioner to orchestrator shift. For generations, expertise was defined by the capacity for execution. A chemist's value was in their bench skills. A mathematician's value was in their proofwriting. A clinician's value was in the volume and depth of cases they had personally navigated. SGI is systematically automating execution across every knowledge-intensive domain. The marginal cost of doing the technical work is collapsing.
What this means is that your value, wherever you are in a knowledge-intensive field, is migrating upward. It is moving from execution toward direction, from computation toward judgment, from production toward curation and validation. The mathematician of the future is not grinding through calculations. They are designing the questions, supervising AI agents in parallel, deciding which candidate results are worth pursuing, and constructing the theoretical framework that connects isolated AI-discovered truths into coherent understanding. That is not a lesser role. It is a richer one, but it requires a deliberate shift in how you develop yourself and an honest reckoning with what your expertise actually is when the execution layer is handled by a machine. The second takeaway: do not fear the dark mountain. Yes, AI can reach places we cannot. The Erdős solution demonstrates this with painful clarity, a mathematical truth that exists at a scale so far beyond human perception that no amount of human effort would have found it. That can feel like a diminishment, like the frontier of knowledge is being pushed out of our cognitive reach. But remember what the jumping robot cannot do. It lands on the ledge.
It cannot build the path from base to summit. Connecting isolated AI-discovered truths to the broader body of human understanding, constructing the theoretical framework that makes those truths meaningful, applicable, and teachable, that work is still entirely a human project. If anything, AGI has created more open questions than it has closed. It has expanded the territory that needs to be understood. That is not a threat. It is an invitation to do the most interesting intellectual work of the century. The third takeaway, and the one I want to leave ringing in your ears, the real race right now is verification. We have crossed a threshold. The generation of new ideas, mathematical, biological, clinical, or physical, is no longer the constraint. AI has made ideation abundant. What is scarce now is trust. Which of these results are actually correct? Which candidate proofs hold up under rigorous scrutiny? Which protein designs will behave in a living system the way the model predicted? Formal proof tools like Lean represent one answer to this in mathematics, a way of building verified knowledge that does not depend on whether a human reviewer caught every subtle error in a 125-page document. The same principle, applied differently, runs through every scientific domain: experimental validation in biology, clinical trial rigor in medicine, reproducibility standards in genomics. In every case, the question is the same. In a world where AI can produce plausible-sounding answers at enormous scale and speed, what does it actually mean for something to be known? That question, what does trustworthy knowledge look like in an age of machine-generated ideas, is the defining intellectual challenge of the next decade. Full stop. It is more urgent than any specific AI capability. It is more consequential than any individual breakthrough. And the people who develop genuine fluency in answering it in their specific domain with rigor and precision will shape what human understanding looks like on the other side of this transition. That is the skill to build. That is the frontier worth heading toward. Let me close with the arc, because I think when you hold the whole story together, it adds up to something genuinely significant. We began with a geometry puzzle posed in 1946. 80 years of human effort, a consensus built on intuition and careful incremental work. And then, in May 2026, an AI model dissolved that consensus in a single autonomous operation by finding hidden symmetries in exotic algebraic structures that no human geometer had ever thought to look for, and proving that the truth lived at a scale so vast it was invisible to us at every human perceivable size. We then followed Terence Tao, the best mathematical mind of our era, through his genuine intellectual reckoning with these tools, from skepticism to adoption to precise, honest articulation of exactly where machine intelligence ends and the distinctly human project of understanding begins. The Kepler who finds patterns versus the Newton who builds the theory. The robot that lands on ledges versus the architect who constructs the path. We then pulled back to see the broader canvas, a silent revolution already transforming structural biology, protein design, and genomics. AlphaFold 3 putting 200 million protein structures in the hands of 3 million researchers, AlphaProteo creating molecular binders 300 times more effective than anything human engineering had produced, AlphaGenome finally illuminating the regulatory dark matter that controls 98% of our genome. And we grounded all of it in 3 honest anchors. Move from practitioner to orchestrator, meet the invitation of the dark mountain, and build your competence in verification. Because in an age of abundant ideas, trust is the rarest and most valuable thing. One final note of transparency. The research synthesis that shaped this episode is not publicly available, but the sources it draws on are, and they are worth your time. Every link is in the show notes. The Terence Tao conference talk, the AlphaGenome and AlphaProteo papers, the coverage of the ERDIS breakthrough, and the archive paper on domain-specific superintelligence. Go there. Go deep.
If this episode gave you a new lens on where we are and where we are heading, it has done its job. Subscribe to Mindcast wherever you get your podcasts. Share it with someone who is grappling with these questions, because frankly, everyone should be. I am Will. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you on the next one.